Alrighty, it is time to jump in once again to this topic of eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi, and I'm the teacher of this particular topic. We've been working our way for this first segment of my live internet studies, which is a total of an hour and a half. If you catch the entire video and audio teaching, then the first hour is given over to this eschatology topic, and the second 30 minutes is given over to an apologetic section where we deal with issues of Trinity. So looking at your screen right now, we're in the yellow slice, topic 7. Excursus, the Islamic Antichrist per Joel Richardson. And I've already prepped you for this multiple times, so I don't have to keep reminding you that even as Christians who don't have really any first-person interest or understanding of Islam, we're not really undertaking this topic so that we can better understand Islam and Muslims and things like that, except to the degree that it causes us to realize that it's this great mission field before us as Christians, as believers, those of us who know the truth, name the name of Yeshua, Jesus, as our Lord. Well, then Islam represents a mission field. But other than that, we're talking about this topic of the Antichrist, right? We already talked about Robert Van Kampen's kind of European model version of the Antichrist, where he rises up out of maybe a unified Europe or revived Roman part of the world and brings his agenda to the world. Ultimately, whether you take the European model or the Islamic model, like Joel Richardson, ultimately you still kind of end up in the same place where there's one world, new world order, one world government, one world religion, one world monetary system, etc., etc., one world persecution, tribulation is going to happen. You ultimately end up in the place where we're dealing with this wicked ruler that the Bible has already given us very, very many precursors or prefigures or antecedent figures from history, right? Remember we talked about Antiochus Epiphanes, and we've already seen various pharaohs and Nebuchadnezzars come and go, Hamans, and the other Caesars and other wicked world rulers. And then in our own kind of modern age, we've seen people the likes of Hitler, Mussolini, and other world leaders who have made it their goal to sort of subjugate all other people groups underneath them. And that's what Antichrist is going to do. And so I'm not really concerned that people aren't wholesale on board with the idea that the Antichrist could be from Islam or within Muslim ranks, etc., etc. That's fine if you're a Christian and you don't hold that perspective. My push, my goal, my aim is to stimulate thought in this particular area to help you realize that there's a strong possibility, and I think even a strong probability, that this could be the particular model that the Antichrist decides to utilize, or that Satan decides to utilize with the Antichrist as his puppet to bring his one world agenda, at least the religious aspect, because Islam is not known to be a very highly political machine as far as I understand, but it is within the thought of Muslim leaders and their own prophets and specialists and students of the Quran to look for and usher in a one world Islamic religion, right? That is within their eschatological worldview. So let's look at Joel Richardson's notes. We left off last week with a quote from the book of Revelation. I just thought I'd back up and read that entire quote and then go from there. This is chapter 5 of his book, The Islamic Antichrist, which is available in a few different places. Look at the description in the video and follow the links to whichever one suits your needs. Here's what Joel Richardson has to say. The great dragon was hurled down. Of course, we're talking about Satan, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. So this is John writing in the book of Revelation. Remember, it's the revelation of Yeshua, the Messiah, as was given to John. It's not the revelation of John. It's not John's revelation. The book of Revelation, which this study really represents, a book of Revelation study. We just haven't gotten to it yet, right? You looked at my topical index there. We're working our way towards a chapter by chapter look at the book of Revelation. These are just the kind of preliminary topics that are going to prep us for that. But remember, John, writing in the book of Revelation, is being shown all of these details of events that are largely future from the futurist model of the book of Revelation that I myself am subscribing to. You might have heard of one of the other 3 of the 4 primary ways of interpreting the book of Revelation. I'll flash a little graphic on the screen and post. There's, in no particular order, there's the preterist view, the historicist view, the futurist view, the one that I'm holding to, and then for some reason I'm drawing a complete blank on what the 4th one is. The idealist view, I believe it is. I'll look at the graphic later on, but I believe that it's those 4: preterist, historicist, idealist, and futurist. And the 2 kind of polar ends are the preterist and the futurist. And preterism largely believes that most of the events of the book of Revelation took place in the 1st century, particularly around the year 70 when the temple was destroyed, and then some of those events spilling over into the years closer to 130 when Jerusalem itself was sacked and the Jewish people were exiled. Yet most preterists hold to a 70 AD event around the destruction of the temple and things like that. I don't subscribe to that particular perspective, but I recognize its strengths and weaknesses and try to glean from it what details I can. But largely, I'm a futurist view, meaning when John penned these words, I'm expecting most of them to take place in the future. And the really kind of urgent aspect to all of this is that as we get closer and closer to these events unfolding, we are largely going to get more and more detailed. So that's not scary. It's kind of exciting that as we get closer and closer to the time of these events, that the Spirit is revealing more and more and helping those of us who are watching for the events to have more and more understanding, because it's like anything that as you get closer to it, you get a clearer view of what's going on. So continuing through John's revelation, or the revelation that he penned, Yeshua's revelation given to John, he, the dragon, pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly. We're reading words that John penned for us that are really a description of what's going to be taking place close to what we would call the midpoint of the 70th week of Daniel, the last 7 years of intense human effort to magnify man's rebellion against God, to thwart the plans of God to establish his Messiah on his holy hill, and to usher in the messianic kingdom that Yeshua is going to rule from. Well, Satan realizes that he's been given a short amount of time because he's thrown out of heaven at this point, and he's on earth with great wrath. And so he goes after the people group that he's always gone after historically, and that's Israel. But this time, it's, as we begin to read, that he's going to go after not just the woman who's Israel, but let's keep reading. She was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so she might fly into the place prepared for her in the desert, where John says she would be taken care of for how long? For a time, times, and half a time. That's 3.5 years, or 42 months, or 1,260 days. And so we know this is a set, fixed time that corresponds to the last half of the 7 years. And so she's given a measured amount of protection from the Satan, from the Antichrist's wrath. Of course, this is Satan incarnate, virtually, right? Satan's puppet, out of the serpent's reach. Then the dragon, watch this, was enraged at the woman, which is Israel, and went off to make war with who? Against the rest of her offspring. And watch this description: those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. This is a description of not just Jewish people, not just messianic Jews, right, who keep the commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus, but this is a description of genuine Christians. This is interesting that this is near the midpoint of the week, because those who hold to a pre-tribulation rapture model, who believe that the church will have been whisked away, raptured away from planet Earth prior to any of these events taking place, to be sure, before the 7-year peace treaty is signed with Israel and before the 7-year kicks off. How do they explain or interpret the presence of those who hold to the testimony of Jesus? It's clearly a description of folks who are Christian in that regard. So I hold to a pre-wrath model. We'll talk more about that in time. This model puts the rapture not at the beginning of the 7 years, not even at the midpoint, and not at the end like post-trib. Instead, pre-wrath puts the rapture sometime after the midpoint, but before the end. So you could say at the 3/4 mark, something like that. So sometime during in the middle of the final 3.5 years. So looking at these details here in the book of Revelation, the address, by the way, is Revelation chapter 12, and you can see all the verses listed on your screen there. Most of chapter 12 is what we read there. Let's now begin to pick up Joel Richardson's notes regarding the events that we just read about. Here's his kind of interpretation of what we just read. We see that Satan, Joel says, is enraged at the woman, Israel, and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. That's the quote from Revelation. He says that Israel's other offspring are those Christians who indeed obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And I think that's a very straightforward interpretation of the words that we just read, and I can kind of run with that, right? That's basically what I just said. Joel continues, this is the only passage that makes specific reference to Satan making a direct target of both Jews and Christians together. And he adds, we know that this passage is speaking specifically of the end times, right? Because it mentions twice in this particular passage the 3.5 year period, which is 1260 days and a time times and half a time. Elsewhere, it talks about this time frame as 42 months, which we're going to read here in a moment. So he talks about this is the period that the Antichrist will have authority to wage war against the saints. So what we're noticing from prophecy is that there's going to come a time on planet Earth when Satan will concentrate his efforts through his puppet Antichrist and the false prophet that we're going to be reading about later on. Satan will concentrate his efforts on persecuting the people of God, resulting in what most prophecy experts call the Great Tribulation, which I myself subscribe to as well. In this regard, I don't see the Great Tribulation spanning the entire 7 years like many Bible teachers are teaching or many Christians have been taught. Instead, I believe that, yes, the 7 years is a time period that we need to watch for on the calendar, and for those of us who will be alive on planet Earth when this 7 years kicks off, which could be very, very soon, by the way. We'll talk about that in time. During the 7 year period, the first part of the 70th week, the first half, are given over to what Yeshua describes in Matthew, Mark, and Luke during his Olivet discourse with his disciples as largely what he describes as birth pangs, the beginnings of the intense time on planet Earth when there will be trouble, Jacob's trouble, tribulation for Israel, tribulation for those who want to continue believing in the one true God, etc., etc. Remember, by the midpoint of the week, according to the Apostle Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, the Antichrist will have taken his seat in the temple, declaring himself to be the one and true God on planet Earth. So it'll be kind of an incarnation declaration of himself as very God among men. At the same time, he will cease or put a halt to the sacrifices that will be ongoing at that point in time in Israel in some sort of reconstructed temple environment, maybe a tabernacle or portable tent structure, a tent of meeting type edifice, or maybe the full-blown temple that will have already been constructed or is still under construction, or maybe just a sectioned or cordoned off part of the Temple Mount. Maybe his agreement with the Arab powers, Muslim powers, who control the Temple Mount currently, will have already reached an agreement to allow Israel to build some form of sacrificing structure up there. So there's an altar where they can begin sacrificing. Well, he's going to bring all that to a halt at the midpoint of the week, declare himself to be God, and then begin to take over Jerusalem as his political capital, his religious capital, perhaps maybe his military capital, although I don't see that happening in mass. I think he'll probably have most of his military weaponry parked somewhere else in a larger location, somewhere where he can keep it hidden from the world's view, somewhere where it's more defensible than Jerusalem. But Jerusalem will become one of his primary headquarters, and we're also expecting him to, at this point in time, begin his intense persecution of Jewish people, a siege on Jerusalem. There's a campaign that's described by Robert Van Kampen as the Jerusalem campaign that takes place probably right around that time at the midpoint of the week. There will be 2 more campaigns after that, the Jehoshaphat campaign, and then finally the Armageddon campaign. But the point I'm trying to emphasize is that at the midpoint of the week, the Great Tribulation should ramp up. If he wasn't persecuting Jews and Christians and anyone who opposes him at that point in time, he certainly will be doing it openly and globally at this point in time. We know that the mark of the beast and the implementation of the setting up of the image that's described in Revelation chapter 13, I believe, will also, or chapter 17. I get those 2 chapters confused. But I think it's 13. Go with me on this one. Let's say it's 13. I'm pretty sure it's 13. We know that he's going to be demanding worldwide worship and restricting buying and selling and movement of any types of merchandise around the world unless you have this mark on your hand or your forehead or the number of his name. And of course, you must worship the image. This could be one giant image or it could be multiple images. The Greek allows for either one. So let's read about the activities that are going to be taking place around this midpoint of the week. These are some more quotes from the book of Revelation. John writes, "The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his authority for how long? 42 months. Does that mean that the tribulation will last the entire 42 months? I don't believe so. My understanding of prophecy, this is in correspondence with words that Yeshua already recorded in the Matthew Olivet discourses, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as well as what Daniel already, in antecedent theology form, gave us way back in the book of Daniel, is that the intense persecution that the Antichrist is going to be performing against God's people will not last the entire 7 years, nor will it last the entire 42 months or 3.5 years. Rather, Yeshua said it best that unless those days were cut short, no flesh would be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days would be cut short. And in so saying, he's letting us know that even though God gives 42 months for the program of Satan to run its course, which it will, right? Remember, the Antichrist and the false prophet will not be defeated by Yeshua until the end of the 7th week at the Battle of Armageddon. So that's 3.5 years later from the midpoint. Yet the tribulation will start around the midpoint, the intense part of it, the most heated part, and will go as long as Satan is given free reign to persecute the people of God. Remember, Daniel already said that he's going to wear out the saints of the Most High, this Antichrist figure. He's going to be given a place and a time to persecute the people of God for the sake of refining the people of God and bringing us, I say them, but us, through the crucible so that we can know truly, once and for all, who is our God and who is our Messiah. And we will hold this belief to the point of being beheaded, to the point of losing our lives. So that's how we will overcome. We will not overcome by defeating Satan ourselves. We will not overcome by avoiding death, even though Israel, the woman, has been given a place to flee into the desert for 42 months as well. This isn't going to change the fact that 2/3 of Israel are prophesied to die, to be wiped out by the Antichrist at this point in time. So this 42 months is really the overall time frame, I understand it, for the tribulation and the program of the devil to run its course. But the tribulation itself will be cut short by the rapture of the people of God from planet Earth, as well as the beginning of the outpouring of God's wrath, not the wrath of Satan. So what we call the day of the Lord. The rapture and the day of the Lord, as I understand it, are back-to-back events. They're the same event, just described from 2 different angles. One is one side of the coin, one is the other side of the coin, and depending on which side of the coin you're looking at and facing, it's either disastrous for you if you're on the wrath side, or it's redemption for you if you're on the rapture side. Okay, let's keep reading John. He, speaking about the devil and the Antichrist, he opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place, right? That's there in Jerusalem, and those who live in heaven, right? That's people in God's arena. He, this Antichrist figure, was given power, and Satan, to make war against the saints. Again, that's what Daniel already prophesied, and to conquer them. That's the point I want to highlight, is that the reason it's tribulation, the reason it's troublesome and a time of trouble for Jacob, is because God himself is going to allow Satan, using the Antichrist, God is going to allow persecution of God's people. Remember, for the most part, national Israel is in rebellion against God because of their blindness towards their Messiah, their rejection of Jesus, and thus they will be ripe for the deception of the Antichrist that took place right at the beginning of the week, where he duped them into signing some false peace agreement between them and their Arab/Muslim neighbors. So Israel is in a place where she's ripe for deception because of her rejection of Jesus. So she needs the persecution from the Antichrist to iron out the wrinkles in her dress, to heat up the metal and cause the dross to rise to the surface so it can be scooped away so that the pure metal remains. God is out to purify his people, Israel. And in order to do that, he's going to put them through the crucible. He's going to put them into the very fiery pit and allow them to suffer a measured amount of persecution. He's not going to wipe them out. He's already promised way back in Genesis chapter 12 through Abraham that he would not wipe them out. The promises given to the forefathers is the anchor for Israel to realize that she will forever be God's people, God's bride. So don't get it in your mind that Satan's going to defeat the people when it talks about he's given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. It's not a type of end to Israel like those who are in replacement theological camps or supersessionism would like to imagine. No, it's just to purify them. At the same time, the church is largely at this point in time in compromise as well. Look at the state of affairs in church today. We're only 1 or 2 steps away from the world in terms of moral standards and our ethics. We've always been in this place where we have had 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the church. And that's not the place that God wants us. God wants us to be white hot for him and his coming Messiah. And so the church has to also go through this tribulation time period before she's raptured in order to prove who is the genuine Christian and who is the professing Christian. So Satan is going to have a measured amount of success against the saints and conquer them. The saints there includes not just Jewish people, the woman, but also includes those who name the name of Jesus. Even if they're just professing only, there are a lot of people who are going to jump ship and say, I was just saying I was a Christian. No, really, I'm not. You know, Mr. Antichrist, please don't persecute me. I'll take the mark. I'll worship worship the image. I'll bow down to whatever you want me to do. Just don't take my life or take my property or whatever. Take my money. Right? That's really, and then at that point in time, they will have demonstrated their true allegiance before Satan and before God, and God will then know, and they will know, and the rest of the world will know, aha, you were just Christian in name only. You weren't really one of God's.